Hello, everybody, and welcome to Get Ready for the Answer. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and I'm here to give you the answer to almost any business question, music business question, recording, mixing, anything like that. I'm here for you. So, just in case you don't know who I am already, you might know me from some of my blogs. Every day, nearly every day, there's blog posts. And also from Forbes as well, and also on my Inner Circle podcasts. These all have gotten high ratings, so check them out if you're not aware. You also might know me from my books. Boy, there's a lot of them out there. And these are some of the latest ones. You can get them on Amazon. You might know me from my courses, and there's some very, very cool ones. So I hope you check them out. But anyway, let's get to it. First thing, here we go. If you have any questions, ask them in the comments, and I'll be sure to get to them. In the meantime, there's a whole bunch of questions that were sent in. So we're going to get to those now. First of all, let me just put something up here. Oh, wrong one. Looking for the right one here. The right scene, as they would call it here. Okay, let's go to the very, very first one. First question. Hang on, let me... get rid of that. All right. From Mino Yom. Is it necessary to use a speaker bass roll-off, such as -4 dB or -6 dB? No. You know what that's for, Mino, is if your speakers are up against the wall, right up against the wall, then there'll be some bass buildup as the low frequencies bounce off the wall. So that's what that's there for, to compensate. The other thing might be if your speakers are in the corner of a room, which again, that's kind of the worst case scenario, and you'll have lots of bass buildup, and those roll-offs are a way to get around that. So that's what you have to look for in those cases. But other than that, you don't need them. And hopefully you're placing your speakers, 12 inches, 18 inches away from the wall. It's going to sound a lot better if you do that. Hey, Rob from Northern California. Glad that you're here. Marshall. Yeah, I'm well. Hope you are too. Once again, if you have any questions, put them over on the right, and I'm happy to get to them. So let's get to another question here. From Earl McLean, some tips to recording vocals on the road. Setup and considerations, and remotely recording, mixing with program material. I'm not sure what you mean with that second question, but the first one, the biggest thing when recording vocals on the road, I think you probably mean in hotel rooms and stuff like that, is you need it quiet. So you need the quietest space possible. So there's two things involved here. The first one is it has to be quiet so there's no outside noise coming in, but you want to make sure that you don't disturb anybody else. And sometimes that's the hard one, especially with the vocalists. It's really, if you're getting a great performance in the vocalist, they're loud. So those are the two things you have to worry about. Sometimes a closet can help. It doesn't sound great, but sometimes it can help with that. And then the third thing would be that, you have a really good signal path. These days, it's easier to actually bring a signal path with you on the road that's pretty high quality. So that's less of a problem than it used to be in the past. In the past, we used to put together what we call fly packs. A fly pack was, basically a road case with a bunch of recording gear. So we don't quite need those big road cases anymore. We can pretty much get by with a whole lot less, and it will sound really good. But, it's mostly acoustics. The other thing is a good sounding room. You don't want to be in a room. Most hotel rooms actually aren't all that bad, but you wouldn't want to record in a bathroom, for instance, where it's really boingy, or any kind of room that's really boingy. So that's the other thing to think about. Boy, lots of good questions coming in. And get to them just a second. Got a couple more here. From Mark Mager. When recording a solo artist with acoustic guitar and vocal track, I have difficulty with balance. It seems if I tune up the vocal track to get it out in front of the mix, it squashes the acoustic guitar. Well, it's probably because you have lots of leakage. So when you do what you have to do on the vocal, then what's going to happen is it's going to affect the sound of the acoustic as well. So, the way around that, there's two ways. You do them separately, the acoustic guitar first and then the vocals. That's the cleanest way. Obviously, the second thing is if you can't do that, then you need to get some mics that give you the greatest rejection. And that would be a couple of figure eight mics. At least one on the vocal will give you, and then you set the null point where it's looking at the acoustic guitar. And that won't solve your problem completely, but it will help it out a bunch. So that's what I would do. Get those figure eights out. And another question that was sent in from Pat Autry. If I have high frequency hearing loss, is there a way to graphically confirm that I have made the mix too bright or tinny? Well, there's a good graphic way. Tonal balance from Isotope will pretty much tell you if you're in the ballpark on the high end and the low end too. It actually works pretty well. So that's something I would check out. But usually you can tell by using the reference tracks. If you're using reference tracks that you know really well, then you know what the high end is supposed to sound like, and you just try to make your mixes sound like that. And that usually does it. I mean, we all, as we get older, we lose our high end. There's no question about it. But I don't find many of the classic mixers worrying about it at all, because they know how to compensate for the most part. So it's rare where you have an older mixer that will send in something to mastering, for instance, and it'll be loaded with high frequencies. If you do it enough and you have stuff to compare it to, meaning mixes that you've done before or some really good reference tracks that you know so well, usually you'll just get in the ballpark from that. All right, let me get to your questions. So I'm from Mark. Hi, Mark. How do you EQ strings of FabFilter Pro QR? Pro QR is the Reverb, if I'm not mistaken. If you're isn't it? Anyway, if you're talking about the FabFilter EQ, look, there's no one way to do this because it all depends on the arrangement. It depends how they're recorded, what strings they are. You can't say, well, do this and do that. You don't know what they sound like. So for me to just say, well, make sure there's 10K, lots of 10K, and lose the 1K. No, I mean, you just don't know what it sounds like, so it's hard to say. What you have to do is make sure that when you put your strings in the mix, that you can hear the strings and you can hear all the other mix elements as well. If the strings tend to be, sometimes they get screechy. If they tend to get in the way of something else, then you have to go in and you have to EQ them, which means that you're going to have to find the frequencies that are rubbing the other mix elements the wrong way and then decrease them. So, and if you have strings that were recorded in such a way where maybe they don't have enough high end, then maybe you'll have to put some top end on. But you don't know until it's time to really put the mix together. So I can't give you a blanket statement on that at all. All I can say is they have to fit in the mix, and the only way is you have to sit there and you have to go, okay, and solo up the strings, solo up the vocals. Can I hear both of them? Is one covering up the other? Okay, so I have to EQ something to make sure that that doesn't happen. Oh, okay, now I go against the snare drum. Is that happening on the snare drum? And then solo up the strings against all the other instruments and see how it fits. That's why mixing can take a long time, because you're EQing a lot and you're round robin EQing. So I'm not going to tell you the there's a right and wrong way to do it. You just have to. It depends too much on your arrangement, Mark. Oh, here's a good one. Hello, my friend. Thank you for sending in the testimonial video that you did. Appreciate it. About balancing kick, bass, snare at the VU meter. You insert the VU in the kick channel. No. You insert the VU meter on your mix bus. So the whole idea is the way we used to do it back in the analog days with the console, and it worked really well, is you take your kick drum and it should go somewhere between -5, -7 on the VU meter. And take the snare drum and it should go somewhere in the same place. Then you get the bass and you somewhere in the same place. And you can actually start to go, you can try with the lead vocal, sometimes that works, and all of a sudden you'll find that you're in the ballpark. It's not perfect, but you're in the ballpark in terms of balances. Now, this only works really well with the VU meter. I mean, it can work with other meters. With the peak meter, it's like -14 or something in order to do it. But I mean, you could work it. You can make it work by just getting everything kind of in the same ballpark. But a VU meter, you'd put if you don't have a VU meter, there's a lot of them that you can get for free, VU meter plugins, and that'll get you in the ballpark. Okay, from Marshall, I'm soldering some cables, XLR on one side, TRS on the other. Could these also substitute direct boxes for instruments? Well, yeah, but here's the problem. And good for you for soldering your own cables. Not enough people do that anymore. The amount of time I spent with the soldering iron, I can't tell you. I don't want to relive those years at all. It's funny because recently I found a cable out in my garage that was only half complete, and it was only an 8-channel snake. And I looked at it and I thought, do I want to spend the next couple hours soldering? No. I just let it there. So anyway, here's what a direct box does. Direct box does. More than anything, there's in the passive ones, there's a transformer inside, and the transformer will take the low impedance and it will transform it into a higher impedance, so it matches better. And that means the frequency response will be better. And you don't get that if you just go TRS to XLR, for instance. The other thing that could happen with an active box is it could add some gain too. And sometimes you need that with something that's, really quiet. So, it's mostly this impedance match that you're getting. That's the important part with the direct box. Okay, Militia, hello. From Sweden. I read all your books. Well, thank you. Hope they helped you. From William. Hello, William. Glad you're here. Oh, Marshall asks, in your opinion, what's the best mix song ever? Well, there's a lot of really great ones. I listen to the, Steely Dan. And most of the stuff that Elliot Shiner's done in the past has always been fantastic. And Elliot's been the longtime mixer for Steely Dan, as well as the Eagles. And you can look at later Eagles records and even earlier ones, the same thing. They always sound really good and they're really wide, and you can hear everything. And there's so many layers, and it's so big. So one of the things that Elliott does, you can have 120 tracks, and he'll make sure you can hear every single one. Unlike other mixers, myself included, who will go in and will say, well, wait a second, you got a lot of tracks, and you don't need them all playing at the same time. Elliott kind of figures, well, if they're all there, then they're supposed to be there. And most of the clients he works with kind of intend it that way, because he works only with the, again, Steely Dan, Eagles. Another one that I really like is from Donald Fagen, Morph the Cat. And Morph the Cat, the low end is magnificent on it. So that's, another one. I do like a lot of Bruce Swedine's mixes that he did with Michael Jackson. One of the problems, though, is there's not a lot of low end, not a lot of bass. It kind of rolls off at about 80. And it was just a product of, we weren't as crazy about low end when those records were made. And I had this conversation actually with Ken Scott. And we talked about the Bowie records. I was just sitting there in a mix room with him one day, and it was like, well, those Bowie records, they don't have a lot of low end. He says, we didn't care about it back then. He says, we couldn't hear it, so we didn't care about it. And that's kind of the case. It was more in the mid-'80s we started to really think about the real low end. But those are some favorites that come to mind. But I have to admit, I do hear things all the time. I have to say that most of the things that Manny Marroquin has done have been fantastic. The Charlie Puth things has been, everything he's done has been magnificent. So you can look to him as, just about everything. Not only in what you can hear, but very creative as well. I mean, you have some mixers that will just put everything together. It will sound good. You'll have others that will be really creative. Will take it to another place. So that's the hard part, actually. Hello, Ann. Glad you're here. Okay, from Iran. In which way do you think the True Iron helps in the mix? How do you use it? I use it. I really like it, I have to say. I'm not one that generally likes saturation plugins, or especially tape saturation or anything like that. I can make it sound good without it. But I do like True Iron. And what it does, it gives the mix some girth. And it's very subtle. It's not something that really jumps out at you, but it's there, and you can notice it when you bypass it. It gives the mix some girth and just some transformer roundness. It really does work, in my opinion. It's one of my favorite plugins. From Kazrog, True Iron. It's not expensive either. And not only that, it will allow you to go to, there's like 6 different transformers, all from classic vintage pieces of audio gear, and you can go between them, select whichever one sounds best. Plus, you can overdrive the transformer and all sorts of things. It's a really great plugin, but it's subtle. Sergio, hello Sergio. What's your approach on reverb for backing vocals? Well, generally speaking, background vocals want to be behind the lead vocalist. So that means that they're usually going to have a little bit longer and a little bit more reverb, just so they sit in the right place. So that's the first thing. Sometimes the way to make that happen would be to add a longer pre-delay. And that would mean past 100 milliseconds. And you'd be surprised that will give you some depth that you might not have had otherwise. So that's generally what I'll think of first to do that. There's a couple of things. With background vocals, the very first thing is, can I get it out of the way of the lead vocal? If they're mono, for instance, then I probably want to make them in stereo and move them off a little bit from the center. If they're already doubled, tripled, whatever, I want to make sure that they're off the center. So there's the lead vocal and the background vocal. So that's, and I don't mean pan wide, I mean just off a little bit. So there's a hole in the middle for the vocal. So that's the very first thing. The second thing is, can I make them thicker? Do I have to make them thicker? And how can I do that? A couple ways to do it. The easiest way is to get a chorus or a light flange and try that and see if it makes them a little thicker and a little wider. Sometimes detuning, especially if there's like some tuning problems, you might want to get something that will fix, not necessarily fix the pitch, but will adjust the pitch. And the old harmonizer trick where there's you have two channels, one is tuned a little up and one is tuned a little down, and that usually eliminates that, makes it sound good. And then the third thing would be to push it back from the lead vocal, and of course that's usually reverb, sometimes delay. Sometimes a nice delay will do that, like triplets are my favorite. A triplet delay and something that's more like, depending on the tempo of the song, quarter or an eighth note delay. But I find that if it's around the 350 millisecond range, it tends to work better. So between 300 and 400 milliseconds, it tends to work really well for that. So, that's the first thing, is move it away from the center, make it a little thicker and bigger, and then move it back. That would be the general approach. Yes, sir. My pleasure. Okay, from Anne. I was wondering if I should use a DI when plugging a guitar bass into instrument input of my Focusrite solo interface when recording into my digital audio workstation. You might not have to. Now, it depends. I'm not familiar with the Focusrite Solo, but I think it probably has a DI input. Now, here's the thing. If you have a DI, I would experiment and see which one sounds better. So if you can plug directly into the interface, try that, see what it sounds like, and then do an identical take using your DI. Then the DI goes into a mic or a line input, and see which one sounds better. Because sometimes you'll be surprised. Sometimes, you'll expect one to sound better than the other, and it'll be just the opposite. So that's what I would do. It all depends on how good the interface is, how good the DI is. Hi, Chris. Love your mixing course. Oh, very cool. I'm glad you liked it. When asked about compression on vocals, add compression often running in harsh S's and T's. Yeah, that happens. The vocal sounds fantastic otherwise. Is there a way to tweak that in the compressor, or should I be using a De-Esser? Yeah, that's a byproduct. It's something we all deal with, but it's time for a De-Esser. And De-Essers are tricky to set up, but they're tricky in that a lot of them just have one frequency that they work on. If you're lucky, there's one frequency that's jumping out. What I tend to find is, though, that it's 2 or 3 frequencies. And there may be something, like 5 or 6K, and there may be something at 2 or 3K, and sometimes there may be something at 1K that's jumping out. You'd be surprised. So I've stopped using De-Essers, which would mean that you'd need multiple De-Essers to make it work. But I've stopped using them, and instead I use a dynamic EQ. And that way I have up to 5 bands if I want. And I find that, and also I can control the bandwidth, and I can control a lot better than sometimes with the De-Esser. The one I tend to favor, well, there's two of them. There's the one I tend to favor is the Waves F6 RTA, which is relatively inexpensive. I think you can find it for 29 bucks. But what it will do is there's a real-time analyzer, so you can actually see where the peaks are. You can go in and say, oh, right there. The other one will be the, again, my favorite, which is the Fab Filter Pro Q3. And it's a dynamic EQ as well. So you can go in and you can see the waveform. You can see the spectrum analysis as well. So I think dynamic EQs work better for this. But if you don't have that, you only have De-Esser, you might have to put it on twice because, again, it's usually more than one frequency that's happening, which is what I've found. One of the things I like about the Shep's Omni channel, for instance, Andrew Shep's great plugin, is he has a 2-channel De-Esser on it. He's found that too. Okay, from Zed. Do you mix in a stereo bus compressor and EQ or tweak individual channels? Both, Zed. I'll usually start with at least one compressor. Usually the EQ comes at the end. You might want to put an EQ on your stereo bus, but usually it's only for just a little bit, a dB here and a dB there, and it's usually like a little bit in the low end, a little bit in the high end. That's it. But you don't put it on until you think you need it at the end. But you're better off to mix into the bus compressor. So for me, that would be an SSL bus compressor. I can't find anything better. Many times I'll use a PSP vintage warmer. Not much of it, but I like the glue that it adds. So a combination of those two. And what I'll do is start the mix through there, get it pretty well going, and then take those out and see if it sounds better or not. And sometimes it does. So it's like, well, okay, we'll either try something else or we'll have to tweak it or whatever. Now, if you go too far in the mix, like towards the end, and then you decide to take those out, you'll find that your mix balance will be whacked. You won't have to start again, but it'll take you some time to put it back together again. Usually the mid-range will get all whacked out. That's why, if you kind of make that decision kind of midway through the mix, and you're better off, I think. I tell the story that last year I did an album that had nothing on the mix bus at all. A whole album. And I tried really hard to use what I usually use, and it just didn't sound better. So you have to trust your ears on that and say, well, sounds better without it, then don't do it. Now, that being said, you can get by without a lot of that stuff if you're doing your individual channels well. So that would mean that, you're controlling everything really well, and you'll find you won't have to use much on the mix bus at all. So, and again, I don't think I ever use more than like 3 dB of compression, and hopefully it's less than that. The more you use, the kind of the worse it is. Because what's going to happen is you're going to lose a lot of dynamic range. You have to worry about that. I mean, you want to keep some. If you have questions, put them in the comments, by the way. Happy to get to them all. From William, do you think that when we mix in a digital audio workstation, a meter view is better for everything? No, I don't. I think the peak meters that you usually have work much better. They, the biggest thing is you don't want any overloads. And you can't tell when you have a VU meter. That was the problem forever that we had in the analog world. So going back to the analog world, you'd have some engineers that be able to have these wonderful recordings and mixes. And you go, how do they do that? Well, it's because they knew how headroom worked. I'll give you the biggest example I can think of. You're overdubbing a tambourine or a triangle, and you only have a VU emitter to work at. Well, if you the problem is the transients are so fast that a VU meter doesn't pick them up. So they're anywhere between 10 and 20 dB hotter than what the VU meter is showing. So if you're actually recording at 0 VU, this tambourine, you could be distorting this whole signal chain because it could be it's probably, at least plus 10, if not more. So that's why we found out, well, if you have a lot of high frequency transient energy, then you have to go down to like minus 10 or minus 15, record down there. Now, with the peak meters that we have in digital audio workstations, you don't have to worry about that. I mean, you can see exactly what it is. So that's why it's better. There are times, like I was telling you before, where getting balances might be better using a VU meter, but generally, no. You don't. It's not a good idea, I don't think. Again, if you think it's better, then maybe you should do it, but I don't. Oh, and I'm very pleased. My mixes are improving. Very cool. Okay, from John. Thanks for sharing your experience and wisdom. Yeah, my pleasure, man. I've heard you talk about the song you use for referencing. Do you use WAV or MPG or MPEG formats? Does it matter? CDs don't seem to have a format I can import in Studio One. You should be able to. I mean, CDs are nothing but AIFF files for the most part. So, it shouldn't be a problem. Yes, you want the highest quality that you can get. So, you don't want MP3s. You don't want anything like that. You don't want something off a stream unless it's a FLAC file, FLAC, then that's okay. You don't want, you just want the highest quality you can get. I like to go to either Qobuz, QOBUZ, or HD Tracks. It's another one I can think of. There's 4 or 5 places where you can go and you can get 96K 24-bit copies of the master of many of your favorite songs, especially the classic stuff is available. So then, hard to get better than that. And it's a great reference point because you can hear lots of little subtleties that you certainly can't hear otherwise. So you should be able to import from a CD, though. CD is that's reasonably good quality there. There used to be a way for most digital audio workstations just to import that. I can't believe that they don't have that anymore. Okay, for Mark, excuse my ignorance. I put the EQ first, then the compression, which has improved the sound using Fab Filter. Okay. If you like it and it works, then do it that way. But here's the problem. This will work if you're only cutting on your EQ. Then you can put it first. That's not a problem. So cut all you want, but as soon as you begin to boost, then you have a problem. Because say you're boosting at 2K. Well, now the compressor is going to trigger off 2K because you boosted it. May not be what you want. You may not be getting the control you want. May not be getting the sound you want as a result. The other thing is, mixing is dynamic. So, especially with the EQ, we're always tweaking. We're going back and forth. Okay, put this in the mix. Wait, oh, it doesn't work with this. I have to tweak the EQ over here. And you're constantly tweaking EQs throughout the whole mix. If you have the EQ before the compressor, every time you tweak an EQ, the compressor's changing, so you have to tweak the compressor. So now you're doing twice the work. Usually, if you just set the compressor up, if it's first in the signal chain, you set that up, you don't have to change it after that. And you can, if the EQ is after in the signal chain, you can change the EQ all you want, and you never have to go back to the compressor for the most part. So that's why you do it, those two reasons. However, if what you're doing works for you, then you should keep on doing that. Okay, from Zed, how quickly do you get basic balance together before start tweaking the automation? Usually you wait until the end, the very end, to do the automation. So you have all your balances up, you have all your EQ, the compression, everything is set, and then you go and you start to do your final tweaks, final balances. And that's usually when you do it. The problem with starting with automation too early in the mix is too much changes. So that means your automation is changing as well. And it's a pain to change automation, generally speaking. I mean, it's another step that you're doing that you don't have to. And the thing about it, like volume changes, for instance. Oh, I just did the automation, but now the whole track is too soft. Well, yeah, you can go in, you can trim it up, but why bother? You can just do it all at once if you wait until the end. So that would be all your automation moves. The exception to that would be, I'm talking about level automation. The exception would be mute automation. Well, you're going to do that right away because I know this is going to be on, this channel is going to be on, and then I know it's going to be off for here. Then I know it's going to be on. Well, you might as well do that right away, so it doesn't distract you in the mix. The other thing that might happen is if you have a big EQ automation. So, for instance, you have to EQ a word or a phrase. Well, yeah, you do that on the fly while you're doing it. So, but usually the fader automation, you kind of wait until the end, especially things that, you're writing faders and things like that. You'll wait until the end. My pleasure, Sergio. Oh, your 5-day course, yeah. There's another one coming up. We'll be doing another one in September. So probably in like 4 weeks. But I'll let you know when it happens. That's a 5-day Facebook mixing workshop. And I did one last month. We'll do another one coming up. Oh, Sergio, this is a good one. This is one I love. Biggest advice for a live sound engineer: concentrate on the vocals first. Boy, you're going to get me off on a rant. I believe that there's a whole generation of live sound engineers that have learned the wrong way. And what they've learned is, I'm going to concentrate on the kick and the snare first. And then they can't fit the vocal in, and the vocal's never loud enough. And the way I was taught was, you go to the thing that's the quietest element on the stage, which is usually the vocal, and you concentrate on that. So for instance, if there wasn't a vocal but there was a flautist, someone playing a flute, That's what you'd work on first. And you get that, and then you build a mix around it. And that way you always make sure that you have a balance. But what I find is a lot of mix engineers spend so much time getting the kick and the snare sounding good, and then they overwhelm the vocal. So, and when it comes down to it, people care about the vocal. So that's my big advice. Oh, yeah, this is a good one, William. You talk about how to use frequencies around 2040, especially achieve the depth that you hear in cinema. Well, cinema is a different case. It's in most cinema you have 5.1, for instance. Most cinemas these days are 5.1, 6.1, 7.1, go on and on. But here's what the point one is. It's not a subwoofer channel. It's what they call a boom channel. It's a separate low frequency channel. It's only for those low frequencies. And it's especially for earthquakes and explosions and stuff like that. It only goes from like 20 hertz to about 120. That's it. So that's the point one of the 5.1. But it's specifically for those low frequencies and nothing else. Just a story about that. So originally, 5.1 was 5 full range speakers and a subwoofer, but the only thing the subs did was they're only there for this boom channel, which only happened 2 or 3 times during a movie, if that. And my mentor in surround sound mixing was Thomas Holman. If you've ever been to a movie and it has THX, well, that stands for Tom Holman Experiment. Tom came up with that. And his whole thing behind 5.1 was, and he told me the way he came up with it, they were listening to dailies for the second Star Wars movie, because he worked for Lucasfilm at the time. And they're doing the dailies for The Empire Strikes Back. And they had Jabba the Hutt, a scene with Jabba the Hutt. And Tom would listen to it on the stage, then take the audio home and listen to it at home, where he had subwoofers. And he'd go, well, why does it sound better at home than it does on the big stage with all the big speakers? And then he realized, well, we have these subwoofers, but we're not using them for anything except this boom channel. So it was his idea to use the subs as extensions, low frequency extensions for the main speakers, as well as the boom channel. So there's actually 2 different signals going into the subwoofer. There's a separate signal on a whole separate channel called the boom channel that's sending those low frequencies and explosions and stuff like that. Plus, there's all the frequencies coming from the other 5 speakers, or at least the front 3 speakers going into the sub. So that's the whole idea behind 5.1 and 6.1, 7.1, 11.1, all those. That's the standard that we use today. Tom came up with it. Tom has been working for Apple. He's been the head of their audio, I think director of audio, for maybe 10 years now. Cool, Zed. Yeah, another one in September. I haven't determined the date, but I think, well, let's see. It should be about a month exactly. No, I think it would probably be yeah, somewhere. Second week, I think. We'll do it. Okay, from Ann. I seem to have static white noise in my overheads Native Instruments studio drummer when the hi-hat is open. Regardless of any setting I choose. Hey, recommendations how to clean that frequency up without killing the overhead track. Well, I'm not sure what that is. It could be the way it was recorded. So if it's there, you either choose to say, well, wait a second, I'm not hearing it because it's buried in the track. I'm only hearing it when it's soloed or playing by itself. But when I listen to the rest of the mix, I don't hear it. So you live with it, and we do that a lot. I mean, there's through the years, the stuff that's been left on, especially in the old tape days, the stuff that was left on, it was just amazing. People grunting and talking between takes, and all sorts of things that were left on that you just don't hear because there's so much going on. So that's one way. You can try a low pass filter and start at 20K and start to move down. See if it gets rid of it. At a certain part, you'll start to change the sound of the overheads, but you might get rid of it. I mean, if it's really high up there and it's like 15K or something, you could get rid of it using a low pass filter. Try that. The other thing would be, let's see, let me just look. When the hi-hat is open, studio drum, when the hi-hat is open, regardless of the setting. See, I'm not sure when you say your overheads, is it the hi-hat or is the overheads? Regardless, you try those two things first. The first thing is, well, I live with it because I can't hear it in the track. The second thing would be, I'll try a low pass filter, and I'll see if I can just gradually move it down and see if that gets rid of anything up there without me noticing. A third option would be, kind of a noise gate, and set the noise gate so it's just cutting that stuff off. And basically what will happen is when the hi-hat overheads are playing, then you won't hear that noise anyway because they're playing. And if there's noise happening when they're not playing, then that will be decreased. Those are the three things without hearing it. From Eric, yes, David Blackmer, DBX. Yes, that's true. David Blackmer, who is the brains behind DBX. He's the B behind DBX. It was DBX, the company. And I can remember when I lived in Boston, DBX was just getting started. And for a minute, I thought I was going to go work for them, and didn't. It's probably a better idea, to be honest with you. But yeah, they had a better idea of how to do compressors than anybody else at the time, and it's still a way that there's something about the DBX 160s and 160Xs that really sounds terrific. Well, very cool. I'm glad, William. You think you make a great concert only with the Apollo UAD sound cards without a console, get a good sound? Yes. No, you can. As a matter of fact, there's a great engineer, Mark Lynette, and Mark has big time credits, like all the Beach Boys stuff that's been reissued and all. Mark's done all that, but he made his living doing live recordings, and for a long time, all he had was really basic stuff. He had a rack with some preamps and no console. I mean, I don't think he ever had a console. Now he has big trucks and stuff like that, so it's different. But he made some fine recordings during the 80s and 90s and early 2000s without a console. So I don't think you need it. I think you can do really well. Apollos sound really good. I'm using an Apollo Twin 2, Model 2. Here I had an Apollo Twin 1. 2 sounds a little better. But I've been very happy with it, and I also have some Apollo 8s around another rig. So I'm very happy with the sound. They sound pretty good. So no, it's not a crazy idea, and it's something that you should go for because it will sound good. Now, can you make it sound better with some outboard preamps? Yes. The onboard ones are good. They are. They're definitely useful. Do they sound as good as some dedicated outboard ones? No. But here's the difference. It's the difference between a $1, $2, $3 preamp that's built into your $5 even, and $100, $200, $300, $1,000, $2,000 preamp that's outboard. So you would expect that to sound better. So that's the deal there. All right, I don't see any more questions. Here we go. Yeah, man, my pleasure, always. Mighty Man, the best techniques or plugins for de-essing a harsh vocal. Well, yeah, use a de-esser. Well, the first thing is, if the vocal is harsh throughout the whole song, then it's EQ. If it only happens in sections, then a de-esser or a dynamic EQ will work better. But if it's throughout the whole song, then you want to find out which frequencies those are and duck them a little bit, attenuate them. Harshness usually comes 1 to 2500, somewhere in there, and ducking them down a few dB might help. But if it's only in certain spaces, then you'd probably want a de-esser. Like I was saying before, I personally really like dynamic EQs, only because there's more control. And I've not used a de-esser in quite some time, but I've used dynamic EQs. Sometimes, two of them at the same time. So it's usually like a Waves F6, and then if I still don't get what I need, then I'll put a Fat Filter Pro Q3. But you can't go wrong with either one. It looks like it. Well, let me just tell you then that if you haven't done so already, sign up for my free mini course, Vocal Mixing Techniques. And what this is there's 9 different techniques that you'll find. 9 different ones. And it's actually 7 for mixing and 2 for recording that you'll find very useful. So you just go to BobbyOwsinskiCourses.com. You'll see it in the top. It's free. LA2 for de-essing only the high frequencies. What are your thoughts about this technique? I don't know that technique. I'd like to find out what it is. I mean, you can do this if you had a sidechain. Now, if the LA2 was modified, if it was a hardware LA2 modified with the sidechain, yeah, you could make it work. But without it, just a stock LA2, I don't see how you'd do that. Okay, from Mark, where would you apply a multiband compressor? Well, not so much anymore. Multiband compressors have been somewhat replaced by dynamic EQs. And here's why. Multiband compressor, they have fixed bands. Now, you can control how wide those bands are many times. Sometimes you can't. But you can't control the crossover frequency or the crossover, how steep the crossover is or anything like that. You can't control the Q or anything like that. A dynamic EQ, you have infinite control, basically. So that's why it works better in a multiband compressor. I can't remember the last time I used a multiband compressor. The other thing about a multiband compressor is there are usually 5 bands. So people get the mistaken idea that they have to use all 5 bands, but it's usually just 1 or 2 that require any kind of compression. So it's rare that all 5 bands are going to be kicking. So it's something to think about. Yeah, man, glad to help. Persona sound cards. I can't talk about their interface because I don't know much about that. They should sound good. I can tell you that the consoles, the Studio Live, sound really good for what they are. I own one that's in a rehearsal studio, but we've done a fair amount of live recordings, and everybody's always been impressed. So I know one person that's in my Hitmakers Club. Sometimes he's here. Ozamaro uses it for a lot of recordings, and he loves the sound. But again, they really do sound good. So this is the console. I believe that the same electronics are in the interfaces as well, so they should sound equally as good. But I haven't played with them, so I can't tell you about that. From Cole, you discussed some uses for dynamic EQs. What are your thoughts on multiband compressors? Well, I think we just talked about that. More specifically, when might you decide to use one over the other? I haven't used a multiband compressor in a few years, to be honest with you. I don't ever see a need to use it. Some people might disagree. Now, if you've used a multiband compressor for a certain function and you like it, you like the way it sounds, you'll probably always go back to it. So I can see that. I never used them that much to begin with, but I've just found the multiband compressors to be so much more variable. I mean, you can do so much more with them. So that's why, and I have, like the Fab Filter multiband EQ, or multiband compressor, which sounds great, but I much prefer the the dynamic EQ. Um, no, I don't have that, and the technique is described in my books, but the mini course is only available with the other courses. Unfortunately, there's four things that you want to do primarily with editing. One is you want to clean up all the noise before a clip and after the clip. So you go in, and it takes time. Everybody complains about this, that it takes time. Most of the big mixers will have an assistant that will do all this before they get to the mix. Otherwise, they'll spend a day doing it. This should have been done before it ever gets to a mixer, but many times it isn't. So the first thing that you'll do is go in and clean up everything that shouldn't be there. You delete it. Grunts, noises, noises on guitars, on electric guitars, are notorious for being there. Things like breaths maybe in between vocals. Sometimes you need them, and sometimes you don't. So you get rid of those. So that's the first thing. The second thing would be usually cleaning up any edits. And many times people will just do a butt edit, which can be okay, but sometimes they pop and they click, so you have to go in, you have to put a little fade in. So that's the second thing. The third thing would be getting rid of any pops of vocal plosives or glitches or things like that. So, you go in and there's 3 or 4 different ways to do it, but you use one of the ways to get rid of those. And then the fourth thing would be to clean up the releases. Of course, all the attacks and releases. The attacks most people get. It's the releases they don't, and that's what makes it sound tight. So, for instance, with vocals, everybody knows, okay, we got to start on 1. Everybody sings on 1, and you should pretty much get it. And if not, you go and you align things. But it's how people release. It's when they stop singing. So luckily we can help that. We just go in and we put fades in, so everything fades at the same place and it sounds tight. So those are the 4 things you're going to be doing. Okay, from William, if you were to do live sound again, can you mention 3 PA sound systems that you would use? I can't. I just don't know. I haven't kept up with it, to be honest with you. And I have to say, it's passed me by a lot because I'm usually amazed at how different it is when I go and I see everything at a concert, for instance. Oh, I have to say there is one system. Geez, I forget what it is. I think it's a at the rehearsal studio that I was telling you about. I have my Personas, and I think it's a Personas um, system as well, sound system. It sounded great, but that's as far as I know. To use a fader controller from Zed, I have one, but I don't use it. I have a Personas. I can't remember the last time I used it. Honestly, I don't feel I need it. I can just draw it in just as easy. Draw the animation in or use a mouse. Oh, cool. Well, glad I could. Had to step away and miss most of this, sadly. Will this video be available? Yeah, you can watch it. It'll be available, Chris. You like the FabFilter multiband? No, I like the FabFilter Pro Q3. Some of your other favorite dynamic EQs? Well, the only other one I use is the Waves F6 RTA. And those are the two I use. I'm sure there's other real good ones, though, but those are the two I use. Find the time editing is worth every minute spent. It makes the results so much better. Yeah, it does. It noise is cumulative. That's one of the things that people don't realize. So it may not seem like much on one track, but it adds up when you have a lot of them. So over 40 tracks, the noise can add up, and when you get rid of all that noise, everything sounds a lot cleaner, a lot better. Oh, William, I think I just mentioned that. I don't know. I don't have enough experience, so I can't really say. Um, that looks like it. Okay, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it. If you have any questions afterwards, you can get me here, questions@bobbyowsinski.com. And there's a whole lot of free PDFs and ebooks and stuff like that. And just go here, bobbyowsinski.com/free-resources, and you'll see lots of stuff. There'll be webinars that you can see, crash courses, and lots of cool ebooks. So until then, I will see you. Maybe we'll do this next week again. And if we do, I'll let you know. Take care, everybody.